Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm very pleased to have a conversation with Josh. Josh has a really interesting story. He not only has had experience firsthand working with or being in a relationship with toxic people, but now also helps people work out of toxic relationships and helps them heal after being in relationships with toxic people. I thought it'd be interesting, as we've already had conversations before, to hear him share part of his story, his observations, things that he sees when he works with people, and generally have a conversation about toxicity, narcissism, how do we heal, how do other people heal, and maybe share a few lessons that he learned. So first of all, Josh, welcome. For once, welcome to the channel. It's really good to see you.
Brad, thank you so much for having me on your channel. I'm super grateful for this opportunity.
I'm really happy to have you here. We've had conversations before on quite a few topics. I know the most recent one we had about forgiving narcissists was actually making people think a lot about themselves, about the approach they had, and I saw quite a few comments that changed the way people saw forgiveness. So thank you a lot for that conversation.
Yeah, that was I think all of our conversations have definitely been very connecting for people, that content, and I'm looking forward to what we're going to discuss today.
Yes, me too. I think it's also helpful when we look at how YouTube works to be able to have more in-depth conversations. And it's, at least for me, it's always a bit of a challenge to try to find the right format to keep it short and crisp, because people's attention spans are, of course, short, and we're competing against a lot of cat videos and a lot of other videos. But also be able to have in-depth conversations where we explore things more. And I don't think there was any way we could have had a conversation on forgiveness in 5 minutes to meet the algorithm.
Absolutely.
So thank you for taking the time. We'll see if we take some short clips to share also, because sometimes the nuggets that could be standalone, but I think we'll just let the conversation flow as usual.
Yeah, I agree.
So do you want to give us 2 words about who you are, your story, and what you're doing?
So my name is Josh Goldberg, and I became a counselor 11 years ago. And I initially started working with people with just addictions and depression. And then I kind of, just because of my own life experiences, I found myself kind of specializing in the area of difficult and toxic relationships. And that's what I've been focusing on for the past 3.5 years, and got a lot of data together from working with a lot of people, and have put together, I guess, a bit of a program to help people while they're in a difficult relationship, and also when they are out of the difficult relationship.
This has been based upon, largely as I understand, your own experience going through it. And I think it's something that we see where, I don't know to what extent it's impossible to help people if we haven't been through it, but I see that it's very difficult to understand what it's like if we haven't experienced it. And we sometimes hear things there are 2 sides to every story, that maybe we're over-exaggerating, which doesn't really seem to apply in the same way when we're dealing with an unhealthy person, mentally unwell person, or a toxic person. I guess you've seen that also.
Yeah, 100%. I totally understand what you're saying. And I think clients also understand what you're saying, because, there's no way that you can learn in a classroom or on an internet course what it feels like and what the experience is to have your significant other actually paint you as a person that is not you. How are you meant to learn about that in theory? It's only if you've been standing there and someone has put this identity onto you can you actually understand what that feels like and what's going on. And that's actually something that I get that's quite common, and I'm sure you get the same thing, where people have been to different, maybe psychiatrists and psychotherapists, and they come and they say, I just feel like that you actually understand exactly what I'm dealing with on a daily basis. And, that's not taking away from psychiatry or psychology, but it does give an extra depth of empathy and understanding to actually have had that experience and to know what that is like, to actually to try and deal with those very confusing and difficult situations.
Yes, absolutely. It reminds me of something we experience quite often that I think is really deeply ingrained into us, is the feeling of unfairness. When someone says something about us that feels really unfair, especially sometimes some of us will think, well, maybe there's an element of truth. Maybe they're seeing something that I'm missing. And I see that often with people, when people throw insulting labels onto others. it can be very difficult to defend ourselves, and we can sometimes be seeing the element of truth. So one way I like to visualize this, that people tend to find helpful, that I find helpful, is to simply say, with any of these epithets and labels, we tend to think of it as being either 0 or 1, binary. So you are or you're not. Are you selfish? Are you not selfish? For instance, are you being aggressive or not aggressive? And one of the issues with this is, if we're anywhere above 0, then it's true, we are. We're being it a bit. But we don't differentiate between being it at 1 out of 10 and 10 out of 10. So I think this is really important to start thinking, I might be getting defensive, but how defensive am I getting? And of course, it can be your point of view where you might say, well, Fred, you're getting to be an 8. And I've got the impression I'm being a 4. Nonetheless, this means that I'm not being a 10. And this helps reduce, I think, a bit of the impact of the label that people throw onto us. Because otherwise you run the risk of thinking, I'm a 1 and that's it. And if we're labeled and tarred as being this, being a defensive, aggressive, selfish person, that really hurts our self-image. When I think the reality is simply much more nuanced. And I see this often with people who are concerned about being selfish. They say, I don't want to be a selfish person. But what they mean is, I don't want to be at 10 out of 10. But they think then the alternative is being at 0. But being at 0 isn't healthy. And if we look simply at a bell curve distribution, let's make this 0, let's make this 10, and 5 is in the middle. Being at one extreme isn't healthy. Being at the other extreme isn't healthy either. We need to find some level of balance where, yes, we are being selfish, but we're not only being selfish. And being too selfless means we neglect ourselves, and that doesn't help either. What do you think of this?
Yeah, that's a very good point. That is a very good point. And I think it's very helpful technique to use, especially when you're receiving the same messages more or less on a regular basis, on a daily basis, because it does like the repetitiveness does, so to speak, like brainwash. It does, when someone's saying the same things and projecting the same things day in, day out, eventually it becomes very difficult to block and to not actually start believe that. So having acceptance in yourself that you're somewhere in that range certainly helps the person to just say, I'm a 10 out of 10. I'm all of these things. I'm going to take on this repeating message that keeps getting thrown at me. Maybe it is me. Maybe I am a horrible person. Maybe I am selfish and abusive, and the messages that the abusive person will actually repeat until they get the response that they need. So I think that's a fantastic way of looking at it with that bell curve, and not being a 10 out of 10, and not being a 0, to being in the healthy, which is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I think it's also, regardless of where we are, just to think, if I'm at a 4 or 6 or 7, regardless of where I am, would I benefit more from staying where I am, moving one notch to one extreme or one notch to the other, but move by notches? And I see so often people who go, I don't want to be a selfish person, so I'd rather be a punching bag. I don't want to be a narcissist, so I'd rather have too much fake empathy or false empathy and continue being a punching bag. You go, well, you can probably tone it down by a notch before you end up at the extreme. It's sort of taking one step closer to the edge of the cliff, as you can take one step without falling over. I understand the reluctance, but when we think in notches, it makes it easier to avoid that.
100%. And that's actually one of the first things that, I help a person with if they have a difficult relationship with a partner that has some, difficult or toxic behaviors, is to give them ways to act effectively so they can replace the way that they were reacting negatively, because that just is like a perpetuating cycle of reacting negatively. So it's a case of, how can I act effectively instead of reacting negatively? Often and there's a big difference between the two. So that's very helpful in just kind of stop the perpetuation of these cycles of relationship meltdowns.
Could you touch a bit upon that, about between the acting effectively versus reacting negatively?
Yeah, so people will tend to, if they don't have something like a particular technique or skill to implement, they'll tend to just act from their emotions. And when you're getting unpleasant emotions projected onto you, the reaction is going to be unpleasant. And if you don't have anything else to do, what am I meant to do? I'm just going to basically fight back, right? To react. You accuse me, I'm going to defend myself. I'm going to launch back at you, right? It's natural human behavior to defend yourself. Mm-hmm. And, people think that anger is like a sin or some type of bad emotion, but anger is actually very normal and natural and healthy, right? Anger can save your life. Anger can save the life of someone else. So if we feel anger, if we don't have anything else to do, we'll tend to just act from that anger because we don't have anything else to do. So coming and working with someone like yourself or someone like me or another coach or another therapist that has effective techniques to communicate, to actually use, a person will tend to not feel that strong desire to react negatively from emotions now, because they think to themselves, okay, this is happening. Fred gave me this skill or Josh gave me this skill. I'm going to try it now because I'm tired of reacting negatively. I'm tired of feeling like a horrible person and calling the person bad names or defending myself. I'm tired of defending myself because that's also not really effective because you don't have to defend yourself. You're not under any form of, accusations or scrutiny. So giving the person conflict resolution tools and techniques and boundary techniques and communication techniques, like actual scripts of when this happens, do this, try this, it's mostly effective. And then the person actually has something, they'll tend to not feel that they'll tend to not act on their emotions because they can actually implement something that they can try.
Yeah.
And that also helps to break the cycle with the other person also, because then the other person's like, wow, he or she's not reacting anymore. Every time I project blame now, I'm not getting this frantic, high energy, emotional person back anymore. I'm not getting that validation, and it can disarm the situation. Obviously, it doesn't heal the other person's issues, but it can disarm the situation a lot quicker and a lot smoother without having to have such a toxic fight and losing your whole day and the children witnessing traumatic scenarios and arguments. And so that's the benefit of learning skills and techniques, is that you can replace the desperate need to just react from your emotions, which is never going to work out good.
Yeah, that's often the case. Is anger, to me, all of the emotions are like a dashboard, and understanding what the emotion means is the important bit. Reacting through the emotion is one option. It doesn't mean it's the best option. So reacting through anger might be a good motivator. It doesn't mean it's the best strategy to get what we want. So, I think people often have a divide between how I think and how we feel, and they tend to go to one extreme or the other. Ignoring the emotions comes with a lot of problems, but ignoring the rationality comes with a whole different bunch of problems. And being skewed and being unbalanced tends to lead to different outcomes that are not optimal. And if we can use both tools, and we don't have to pick, I see a lot of fake dichotomy. I pick one, I pick the other. I'm rational or I'm emotional. It's like, well, being one or the other deprives you of a whole set of tools, and they both lead to different problematic outcomes. But then again, to me, if we get the outcome we want, everything's fine. If we don't get it, we should change something. And then the question is, what do we change? What's the best strategy to get the outcome we want? And that's a really good point. With what you explained, this reminds me of, maybe I can run you through a diagram I use to illustrate this, because people have found it really helpful when I show things this way.
Yeah, diagrams are really helpful. It's really helpful to see these concepts and pictures, right? Because they don't exist. They're concepts, so it's really good to see them in the diagram. So cheers for doing that.
Yeah, it's. I find it makes it easier to organize the thoughts spatially, and to put, let's say, more concrete words to things that we see. So this is the basic diagram I use when I work with people. So I'll run you through the logic, and that's maybe a 101 for people to understand the thinking behind the diagrams I use in my videos. The idea is that we have a basic system, and a system simply means we have different people. So we are the blue person, or if we act in a specific way, then we probably get a specific reaction. And if nothing changes, nothing changes. If we want to change something, we can change the way we think, or we change the way that we act. So using this blue line here. What happens is if we get one reaction, so I sometimes talk about a blue action, a blue reaction. Let's say that something changes and the toxic person starts acting in a red way towards us instead of a blue way. Something has changed in the system. We don't know why it has changed. Some of us will think, well, this person must be a lunatic, and that's that. I think that's sometimes the healthy way to do things. But some of us, some of us think, maybe I did something wrong. So I should change. If I want to get the blue reaction again, I need to try, for example, having a yellow action, and then I'll see if I'm getting the reaction I want. And what we do here is we simply do a line, but say that if this is me, and my goal is to hit the black target, but I'm hitting a red target, then I need to change something. I'll actually do this target again. I call it a blue target because that's my goal. My goal is to have something nice and healthy, but I'm hitting the red target, then I'll do something to try to get back to the blue one. And I'm not sure which way it's going to go, but I'll triangulate. So I'll change my behaviors to get back to a healthy, open in a healthy way. So open communication relationship. This is assuming, and this might be the mistake, that both people have the same goal, which is having the blue target. But what happens sometimes is that the other person who acts in a red way actually wants to see me struggle and change my behaviors, because that shows how much I care and so on. So the red reaction is done on purpose in order to change my behavior and manipulate me. Now, when you were talking about the anger controlling us, there's another element to this diagram which is often forgotten. And it goes on the principle. So I got this from Jonathan Haidt and his great book, The Happiness Hypothesis, about positive psychology. They use a lot of this, but there's one image I really like, which ties into the idea that as humans, we have two parts the two models. One model is saying that, we have a rational part and a irrational part. One model, call it A, there's a model B. Model A is the most common one. It says we are 90% rational, and 10% of the time we do weird stuff. Model B says we are 10% rational, 90% of the time we do weird stuff, but we hallucinate that we are rational. And this is the model that hypnotists use, for instance, that we use a lot in psychology, at least with the methods I'm using. Instead of trying to rationalize things, we simply observe and we assume that things work out. So using Jonathan Haidt's model, it says, well, this part is very nice. It's all very nice. This is a human part. But underneath the human, there's actually an elephant. And the elephant has got its own agenda. And the elephant is the part that feels the emotions. So when we're getting the reactions, we're actually getting a reaction that goes into the elephant. That's a blue one. Let's say the blue one makes the elephant feel happy. So here, there we go, happy. Or we get a red one of anger, and the red one of anger makes the elephant feel stressed. Now, if the elephant is feeling attacked, threatened, and starts defending itself, the rider is not very likely to be able to control it. And if we view the emotions as being interpreted by an elephant, but we don't understand what's happening, we are the rider, probably hallucinating that we control everything, that there is no elephant, that we're floating around. And if we know there's an elephant, we hallucinate that we can understand the elephant. That's like saying, your elephant went left. Why? Well, because the elephant was thirsty. Okay. When did you figure that out? I knew it all along. How did you know it? I just knew it. It's like, that's nonsense. Your elephant went left. You didn't control it. You figured it out when the elephant started drinking, and then you hallucinated that you understood what it was doing before it was doing it, when in reality, you don't have a clue, which is fine. And none of us have a clue. But if we're living in the hallucination that, oops, it's the wrong one. If we're living in the hallucination that we are being, in model A, that we're being rational 90% of the time, we can't accept this. And this is why I think the worldviews are really important. Our model of reality should help us predict what's going to happen, should be falsifiable, or should at least make us happy. And when people live in the worldview A, that we're 90% rational, they can't predict what's happening. They can't predict behaviors. They can't understand themselves. It makes them miserable. Whereas the other one is falsifiable. We can observe with behaviors when people are being rational and not. Most of the time they're not. It helps predict really well, really, really well. And usually it makes us happy because we stop worrying about things. So I think what we often forget is, what is the role of the elephant? What is the elephant feeling? And that makes it easier to go, I see what's happening. My elephant is feeling anger. Why is my elephant feeling anger? Because I have a goal and there's an obstacle. What is the goal? What is the obstacle? And what's the best strategy to overcome the obstacle to reach my goal? And that can help calm the elephant down and say, I see what's going on. The person can't trigger me as much because I understand what's going on. And now you start having teamwork between the rider and the elephant working together as a team, thinking, how do we work this out? And there's more of a dialogue that happens.
Yeah, and that's very important, because the person that is aggravating and stressing the elephant out have made it very clear that they're not willing or able to care for your elephant. So they stir the elephant up. I'm talking about emotional neglect right now. The toxic person is not emotionally available, especially in their times when they're having a severe trauma trigger. They lose their empathy and they're not able to deal with their own emotions, and especially the other person's emotions. So they're stirring the elephant up, stressing the elephant out, aggravating the elephant, and yet they're not in any way going to help with, with, I guess, calming the elephant down, being attentive to the elephant. And of course, I'm talking here about empathy, because that's what empathy does to emotions. It helps the emotions to feel understood and validated, and stops the person from needing to behave and act out these emotions when you can express your emotions as a feeling. But the toxic person is not available to hear your feelings. In fact, when you share with them your feelings, it normally creates more toxicity, more defensiveness, more aggression. So yes, the rider needs to become an expert on caring for this elephant, because the person that's aggravating the elephant is certainly not going to care for it. They're not available to care for it. They're not caring for it. They're aggravating it and leaving you to look after this disgruntled elephant.
Exactly. I think a mistake we often make is assuming the other person cares for our elephant. But when we observe the behaviors, what we see is somebody trying to wind the elephant up and then smirking when they see us try to calm the elephant down. And something we got to remember, which for many people is counterintuitive, is it's our elephant. It's our responsibility. Our elephant is counting on us. So when people come and berate the elephant, attack the elephant, hurt the elephant, insult the elephant, and we let them get away with it, we're basically telling the elephant we don't care too much about him or her. And that's a broken relationship, and something that I often do when I work with people. So when I work on this segment, I do a combination usually of working with energy channels, as that helps the emotions come out. But then I make them visualize going to talk to the elephant and apologize to the elephant and recognize the harm that they allowed happen, and show some gratitude to the elephant, because the elephant might have gotten things wrong in the past, but the elephant always did his or her best to keep the person safe and keep the person happy. It always came from a place of love, always. And so when the elephant makes a mistake and we say, stupid elephant, idiot, then, that's not really showing gratitude. The best we can do is say, thank you for trying. It didn't work. It's okay. You did your best, and now let's work together to make it better. And that's usually a very emotional moment. People release a lot of self-hate when they do that.
It's very, very healing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not quite sure how it works or why it works, but I see that it works, and I see that that's usually a big turning point of going, I have an elephant. I know deep down inside all the harm I've done and I've allowed happen, and now I'm gonna change things. Now I'm gonna earn the trust back. And
that's that I can relate to what you're saying a lot. I think that's the moment where the person, I guess, accepts and realizes that I'm going to stop expecting or relying on this other person to do anything for my elephant, and I'm going to be the one to tend to it, is kind of like a kind of very redeeming and liberating moment when they take ownership of the elephant, and because it's getting their power back, right? If you're leaving it up to someone else to look after your elephant, you really don't have any control or any power. You're powerless.
Yeah.
Because if they are lazy and they don't, or they're not available, or they don't care about your elephant, you're just sitting by saying, "Aren't you going to care for my elephant?
Yeah.
My elephant's upset. Are you going to do anything for it?" And that's obviously, it's neglect on a lot of levels. It's neglect. And when the person basically takes that ownership back, like, you know what, I'm not going to rely on this person anymore. I'm not going to rely on anyone. I'm going to take 100% responsibility for my elephant. And I'm going to forgive myself for all those months and years that I just was hoping that someone else was going to do something for it, and I kind of neglected it. It's a very healing moment. So I can totally relate to what you're saying, and they let go of a lot of guilt and regret, and they're able to go forward with this ownership, which really gives them their power back. Like, I'm looking after my elephant now. If something doesn't happen for my elephant, it's my responsibility and not someone else's.
Exactly. And I think
that's a good feeling.
It's an amazing feeling. It's very empowering. And I think it's also helpful to view things as saying, let's imagine, you're outside of the elephant and it starts snowing, as it is here. What are you going to do about it? It's snowing is not your responsibility. What you do about it is your responsibility. And I think it helps when there's, another person involved. It helps reset the balance between what is my responsibility, what isn't, what do I do about the outside circumstances. And I did a video recently talking about the locus of control and how for some people it's primarily external. So things that happen to them are things that happen. It's the world doing stuff to them. And for other people, it's primarily internal. What happens to them is primarily their responsibility. And again, it's a bell curve, and being at the extremes probably isn't helpful, but it's interesting to see where people's main focus is. So to be able to switch from things happen to me versus what do I do about the things that happen to me? That usually is really liberating. I see people get triggered by that because they view it as being extremes. But again, the element of being triggered tends to tell me that they have an unhealed elephant that is upset about something, because the triggering is, stuff they hear doesn't have any power if they don't give it power. And that's usually an indication that something there should be examined. I mean, it's an elephant getting upset about something. So we can be upset about the thing, or we can look after our elephant and ask, what's happening to you? Why is this upsetting you? How do we heal you so it stops upsetting you?
There's definitely a lot of truth in that.
Yeah. I was wondering actually when you went through actually, do you want to give us a short summary of your situation and how you lived through toxicity? Because maybe then we'll see some of the patterns where you understood some of these things and the tools that helped you that then probably you help use with other people.
Yeah, so I actually had two scenarios that I experienced. One of them was unsuccessful, and one of them was a shining success. Yeah. And it's mainly the reason why I'm here today. And the first experience that I had was obviously very confusing because it was my first real, real relationship with the magnitude of toxicity that I experienced in that relationship. And that was a very short relationship. It was only 9 months. And I certainly learned a lot from that scenario. But at the start, like most people that first find themselves in these relationships, the first thing was just terribly confused. Like, what is going on? Right? There's no explanation. I can see that there's very strange things happening, but with no explanation. So the confusion is obviously is the main thing that people just cannot deal with, because when you're confused, all your confidence and your bearings and just you're not settled in your stomach. So that was my first scenario. And the second scenario that I went through was with my current partner, and we actually together turned a dysfunctional relationship that was not in any way able to exist into an actual study and into an actual I guess, program on how does the partner deal with this? How does the individual with the trauma deal with this? How does the person heal? Basically just worked it all out ourselves, simply because couldn't really find much help in what we looked into, which was a number of different therapies and treatment things. I think my wife tried like 4 or 5 different modes with different people in different countries. So that is the success story. But the first one was definitely not the case, and 2 totally different scenarios, but in a lot of ways also quite similar. Yeah,
I'm really curious, because one of the things that we hear very little about is people who suffer, I guess you can summarize it as being cluster B type personality disorders. Very few of these people actually want to do anything about it. So the majority think the problem is the outside world. I mean, I had someone say this to me literally. My problem is that people don't do what I want. If they just did what I wanted, I wouldn't have to manipulate them. So the problem is them, because they're depriving me of the outcomes that I want. Of course I ask, well, what if they don't want the outcomes you want? They go, well, then I manipulate them to get what I want, because I'm not going to give up on what I want. That's the most important thing. And to hell with the others, even if I lose friends and family and so on. So to have someone go, I want to do something about this, something isn't working out, is uncommon. How was this the case? In the first case, you had the classical situation where the person didn't want to change something. In the second situation, you had somebody who tried different therapies, was willing to work on herself. What is the difference between the two? How would you explain that your current partner is actually willing to do the work? What is the specific difference there? How come? Because this is a very unlikely and uncommon occurrence.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so first of all, I would say that there's a huge factor involved, and that is how much does the individual have established as a false personality that they're surviving through. The first relationship that I was in, she had cultivated a very good public image, and she had a lot of things that were kind of validating for her, at least at the start. I kind of disintegrated that false personality quite quickly. In fact, you know what? She actually dismantled it herself. But that's factor number one, is how much is the person deluding themselves with a false personality that they have cultivated and established in society. If they have that, there's very little chance that they're going to walk away from that coping mechanism that's a lot more pleasant, because human beings are all pleasure-driven and pain avoidance. So you take someone that has a false self now, they have like a narcissistic false self, they're being praised by a community, or they have a distinguished position, or everyone sees them a certain way, they've put on like a character that everyone's bought into. You come along now and say, look, I want you to actually deal with your childhood trauma and experience a whole bunch of pain temporarily. They say, well, no, thanks. I'd rather just keep deluding people to think that I'm fantastic. Why would I choose what you're asking, right? Everyone loves me.
Yeah.
I make soup for the whole community. Everyone praises how good my soup is. And you're telling me to sit and to cry for a few hours and to feel all these emotions? I'm scared of emotions. I don't want to deal with that. So first of all, how much of a false self does the person have? Do they have something that they've spent years cultivating? And if they do, there's very little chance that they're going to just to extinguish that. I like to describe it as like asking a movie star to take a job in the McDonald's drive-thru.
That's a good
Why
one.
would they give up the fame and the fortune to go and serve burgers and fries for $15 an hour?
Yeah.
That's how the individual sees it. You're asking me to confront my pain, but if I just stick with what I'm doing, there's nothing wrong with me. If I just stick with what I'm doing, everyone thinks I'm great.
Mm-hmm.
I'm praised. In fact, you've got the problem. So they'll actually turn it back onto you and to say you've got the problem because you're threatening my false self that I have spent months or years cultivating, growing, convincing, tricking, manipulating people, bribing people, flattering people. And if you're going to jeopardize that, I'm going to smear you because I need this false self so that I don't have to confront my pain.
Yep.
And so that's the first thing. That's the first difference. And my current wife, she didn't have a false self. she was very close to her trauma. She was very close to her pain. And that gives a person, I guess, more of an incentive to heal, because they don't have to give away a false personality that everyone is convinced is grandiose and amazing.
That's a really interesting observation. I mean, I think, what I observe is with these toxic people, they're very rational and down to earth. They're sort of business minded about it, where they're in a situation that's sort of working out for them. And they might have two alternatives, or three alternatives. One is we make this situation work out, for them on their terms and conditions. The alternative is that they address the childhood trauma and what's going on there, and they view it as having a huge downside and no potential real upside. And the alternative is simply finding a new supply in case they're not getting what they want out of the situation. And I've seen it being, it's very confusing because we assume that people mean what they say. So it's not uncommon actually to have one of these people talk about having children, having a family, whilst at the same time grooming the new supply to be able to leave. So we assume people are telling the truth. It's just really often not the case. People lie a lot. These people will lie to get whatever they want, and they'll say anything to get the supply, and they don't mean the words they say. What they try to do is say whatever it takes to get the reaction that they want, and that's it. And if they're not getting it, they'll just go and get another one, and they don't really care. It's a bit like, if somebody wants coffee and there's a coffee shop that starts saying, I start putting conditions to serve you coffee. Like, I need you to address your childhood trauma for you to get good coffee, but then you'll see the coffee will taste better. But next door, you've got a new coffee shop that opens and says, we'll give you whatever you want, and there's a 50% discount. We know where the customers are going to go. They'll go to the easier one because we're putting in friction, and the other one doesn't have any friction. Now, in this case, as you were saying, she was already acting in a way that proved that she wanted to address things. And I think this is really key, is to see, is the person behaving like someone who wants what they say they want? If they say they want to address the childhood trauma, what are they doing? I remember one person whom I've referred to a few times, who, according to her, had significant childhood trauma. She gave me some level of details without being too specific, and it turned out the details she gave me were framed in a way that made it sound very different, which was very confusing. But she never wanted to see a therapist. When I pushed her to see a therapist because of the issues, and going like, issues or not, you have severe childhood trauma, you need to address this. I mean, it's impacting us, but it's just for your mental well-being. It turned out she spent all of the sessions talking about me and my issues. And I found out about that after 4 sessions that she'd had. Yeah. And just going like, this is not what we'd agreed on. We'd agreed that you were going to address your stuff regardless of what was happening. But for her, there was a no-go. So she flipped it around and turned it against me. And I think we can also have a blind spot when people say, I have trauma, to go, we respect that. We don't want to be pushy. We want to walk on eggshells around you because it must be really difficult. But then we can also frame it as being, most people do have trauma. The question is, what are you doing about it? If it's bad, are you doing something? Where are you at today? And if you don't want to address it, you have every right to not address it. But we have every right to not want to be with somebody who's not addressing it, especially if that's creating problems for us today. So having trauma isn't a blank pass to act in a toxic fashion with people around us. It's not a get out of jail free card. It happens to people. What are you doing about it?
Exactly. Trauma is a license to heal. It's not a license to harm other people.
I like that one.
And also that's the nature of attachment trauma, Fred, is that the person's inner child that was emotionally neglected or scapegoated or mocked by the family or sexually abused or blamed, this child feels like that something bad happened to them, right? So that in their attachment style, they really feel like the victim. They feel like that someone else has to fix themselves because something happened to me. And when this child grows up into an adult, they have this same way of thinking and feeling where it's like, yeah, I'll go to therapy, but I'm going to talk about the problem, which is you. It's not me, because the child sees that something bad happened to them, right? Meaning mum wasn't the way I wanted her to be. She blamed me. She she mocked me, she rejected me, she wasn't there for my emotions. So now as an adult, when you say go to therapy and resolve your issues, they don't see the need to do that because they see the problem as being on the outside, right? Meaning the problem was the environment, the attachment. And if you're the attachment, you're the problem. And obviously it's very blocking to the healing process to have that way of thinking and feeling. And this is actually something very common that I see this all the time, is until the individual with the trauma can stop making their issues about the relationship and actually take it back to their childhood trauma, they're never going to make any progress, because the relationship, what's happening in the relationship and their partner, yes, their partner might have their own issues, but the relationship's not the issue. The attachment trauma is the issue. And until the person is able to stop treating it as a relationship issue and to stop thinking that it's the other person, which has replaced mum or replaced dad, the attachment trauma, and actually own what they went through and what they experienced and what they're feeling, very unlikely that they're going to make significant progress until they own it 100% what they're feeling and what they experience. And that just, what your example back there just reminded me of it, where the person will think that by going to therapy means to just talk about all your problems, the other person's problems. Because it's hard for them to own it, because they have this I call it like a victim entitlement, where it's like something bad happened to me, therefore someone else needs to do something about it.
Yeah, which is, it's a very seductive narrative because it removes any responsibility from us. We can feel sorry about things. We get a blank pass to act in a terrible way towards others. And, some people view suffering and victimhood as being badges of honor to wear, which always strikes me as being strange, because the notion that I'm better than you, or I've got something special, is one of the traits and red flags of toxic people and narcissists. So, exactly. Whereas I find people who are sincere about it, they don't brag about it. They just want to find a solution and stop the suffering. And other people, they enjoy public displays of it, exaggerating it. And there's a huge level of reinforcement that happens with this that I think isn't helpful to them, isn't helpful for other people who, let's say, have too high levels of quote-unquote empathy and actually hallucinate the suffering of the other, but literally feel the suffering. There's maybe just to pop in with this, one example I use about this is, let's imagine you see me putting my hand on a burning frying pan. A lot of people will feel pain, and real pain, and they're going to start getting distressed and upset about the pain that I'm going through. But the reality is, whatever they're feeling doesn't change my pain. And so first of all, they can suffer as much as they want. It doesn't do anything for me. It doesn't make my pain go away. We're not sharing the pain. It's just adding to the total amount of pain. But they're not actually feeling it. They're hallucinating it. But they're not physically feeling the pain, but they're still feeling the pain in the body and their mind. So that's not helpful for me. It doesn't change anything for me. It's actually a bit selfish, bizarrely enough. It starts making it a bit about them. And I understand, I've been through this myself. When it shouldn't be about us, it should be about the person who's got their hand on the burning frying pan. But also, we don't know to what extent the frying pan is on. I might be wearing a protective glove. Maybe it's on, but it's not very hot. But maybe also what I really want is to see people get wound up, and I'm willing to put up with the pain in order to get this reaction. And as long as people react, they're reinforcing this behavior, they're motivating me to continue, and if they stopped, then I just get my hand off the burning frying pan because I'm no longer getting the reaction that I want. Which reminds me, actually, I'm going to do a video about this, but I'll just jump in. A joke. Why did the narcissist cross the road?
Why?
To get exactly the reaction that you gave them.
That's a good one.
And
very true.
Yeah, I think so.
Funny. It's actually funny that all the jokes on narcissists, they're funny and they're true at the same time, right? Which is kind of says a lot about narcissism.
I think so. Yeah. And it says a lot about humor, pointing out uncomfortable truths to make us laugh at them, and then, lose the facade of everything is so dramatic. I think it's one thing when you do a bit more healing is we look at these things and just go, the whole situation is ridiculous. And it's no longer that dramatic. That's why I like using the word nudnik instead of narcissist. a bit softer.
Yeah,
Yeah, just an annoying person.
yeah, schmendrick. Remember I taught you that word as well, schmendrick?
Yes, I remember that one. That's another good one.
Yeah, schmendrick's like a fool or like an idiot.
Yeah.
And you're right, that is a very good point in the person's healing when they no longer take the person's tantrums or their toxic behavior seriously and they start looking at it like, Nebuch, right? Nebuch means like, look at this poor thing. Like it's almost it's not pity. It's like you said, like a nudnik.
Yes. I think, when we view it as being riders and elephants, first of all, it helps our elephant stop getting triggered. And it helps us stop thinking, oh, maybe I did something wrong. But if we focus on the behavior, we just see that with a tantrum, there's a person sitting on a very angry little elephant who can start going, I can see the elephant is angry, but the elephant wasn't angry because of something I did. That's just an angry elephant most of the time. And, we touched upon this before with keeping emotions inside. That simply means you're sitting on an angry or sad or scared elephant that's going around and sort of trying to control itself. But it's like if a dog has got rabies and tries to go, is attached to a leash and goes around trying to bite people, once you understand what's happening with a dog, you don't get close to the dog. Whether we can help the dog or not is a completely separate question. But if the dog won't let anyone get close, then that's it. I mean, what are you going to do? Get bitten, get rabies? It's the dog's choice. If the dog calms down, we can help it. If it doesn't want to, then that's that. And
exactly.
I think, one of the confusing things in these situations is we try to understand and unravel the situations, and it can be really confusing to do so when we don't have the right toolkit. So often we ask ourselves the wrong questions. Do you have any specific questions that you asked yourself that were, let's not say wrong, unhelpful? So any questions that weren't helpful at first, and how did you switch from the unhelpful ones to the more helpful ones?
I remember initially my first question, I remember it very vividly, was what's going on? That was my first question. And I think this is a very common first question because human beings like to know what they're dealing with before they even decide on how am I going to deal with it. So for me, I remember very vividly because the first 3 days we stayed in a hotel together and there was nothing out of the ordinary there. Day 4, when we left the hotel and we got back into the house on the first day, this is fourth day of living together. First, straight away, I'm like, what the hell is going on? Something's wrong. Something's considerably wrong. What's going on? Yeah. So that was my first question. Do I think it was an helpful question or unhelpful? I mean, obviously, I'm not a detective. I was trying to be a husband or a relationship participant, but that was my first question that I asked: is what is going on?
So
now, I think that's where we come in. Yeah, you should jump in.
Just jump in with this one very quickly. It's interesting because you say you're thinking what's going on, but at the same time, you're seeing exactly what is going on. So they're two different levels, I think. And something that I see often is we're very clear with what we're seeing, but we can't make sense of it. Or we're not sure whether we believe it, whether it's comparing to previous behavior that simply changes because we see the current behavior. So we don't understand the change, or whether we're comparing the behavior to the words. And we see that there's a discrepancy between the behavior and the words. But, a common occurrence I see is people are extremely clear with what they're seeing, but they don't understand how to integrate it in a worldview that makes sense. And this hesitation seems to mean that some of us keep going along with it until we can make sense of it.
Exactly. It's like, I would describe it like moving in with another person, and they know that there's a ghost in the house, but they don't tell you about the ghost. So you're sitting there on the couch and all of a sudden a glass goes off the counter and smashes everywhere. And you're like, oh my goodness, what was that? And they're like, oh, nothing. Might have been you, right?
Yeah, what glass?
But really, what glass? There's no glass broken. So they're trying to hide the ghost that they know is there. And you're dealing with a ghost that you can't see. And that's actually what makes these toxic and abusive relationships so stressful. A lot of people think it's the criticism, the lies, and all this stuff. Really, the thing that I believe and the thing that I see and the thing that I just experience myself that make these toxic and abusive relationships so stressful to the individual that's trying to be healthy in these relationships is living with this ghost that they can't see and they don't know where it's coming from. It's like being attacked by an invisible demon. And that's stressful, right? If someone said to you, oh, hey, there's a ghost living in this house, every now and then he knocks glasses off the counter and occasionally he uses the restroom. So now you've been informed that there's a ghost in the house. This is what the ghost does. So if there's any noises, I can just chalk it up to the ghost. I could actually get used to that. Human beings can get used to any conditions as long as they know what's going on. The stress with abusive and toxic relationships is that something's attacking me and I don't actually know what it is or where it's coming from. And
and you're being told you're not being attacked.
Yeah, exactly. And that is obviously extremely stressful because, human beings like to know where the threat is, what it is, so that they can protect themselves, but not knowing where it's coming from. Protecting yourself is very difficult. And obviously dealing with it is also very confusing and difficult. So that was the first question that I asked myself, like, what on earth is going on?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're right, I was observing what was going on, but I wasn't even able to put I wasn't able to put anything on it. It was like, there's nothing that I can, like a UFO, unidentified flying object. Yeah.
Imagine.
So this was like an unidentified, avoiding person.
Yeah. There's a graph I use to illustrate that, which sometimes is helpful for people. And it's saying that when we have a decision-making process, we have different steps. One step is actually collecting the data. The next one is processing the data. And then there's the result or the conclusion, which then we check with, here we go, reality. So here, the processing, and I can never draw this, unfortunately, but this is supposed to be imagine this is a brain, okay? It's sort of our algorithm for processing the data. To make a good decision, we need data, we need to process it, then we see the result, and then we check. So there are 4 steps. In terms of data coming in, the 3 types of data. We have data which is false, data which is true but irrelevant, and then data which is true and relevant. If we don't separate between what is false, what is true and irrelevant, and true and relevant, even if the processing is at 100%, we're not going to make good decisions. And if there's pollution here with the data, we're not going to make good decisions. If it's at 100%, but the processing is not 100%, that's where the bottleneck is. So if we have cognitive biases, which we all do, we start reducing the level of processing. But if there's pollution in the data, that also reduces the capacity. If we want to we can debate whether we just look at the bottleneck or we multiply these things. But let's say that the processing's at 25%. Even if the data is pure, we're getting at most 25%. And if the data is polluted, even if the processing is right, then we're limited in our capacity to get a result that actually works. So we get the result, we compare to reality, we see it doesn't work, and then we go back in the circuit and we go round and round until we get to match things. What I find really complex in these situations is that on the one hand, the data is compromised because the person lies to us. They lie to us about their past, how they think, how they behave, facts. They try to also gaslight us about reality and other people, separate us from our friends, from our family, cast doubts on others. And when we are losing our social circle, we're losing our touch of reality. And it's easy, again, using what we said before, of saying, instead of saying there's nuance, so people are somewhere between 0 and 10, is going, your best friend is jealous of you. And it's probably true that the best friend has some level of jealousy above 0, but it's probably not at 10, or is envious. And it's like, okay, well, I'm sure you've got friends in Australia who look at your life now and go, wow, you really made it. It's great. On the one hand, they're happy. On the other hand, they might be a bit jealous, but they go, the jealous part is being childish. Really, I'm happy, but really it's showing me that Josh has made such big changes. I wish I could do them too. I don't want to remove them from him. So there's some element, some nuance there. But this person will be saying, well, that person is just jealous. And that helps cut off the ties from the people around us who keep us grounded. Then they also have a toxic way of thinking, which impacts our processing. They will impose, and the toxic way of thinking, for example, is saying the person is jealous or isn't. It's the binary thinking. And that dramatically crashes our ability to process. It's oversimplistic. When people use oversimplistic models, they are brainwashing others, they're controlling others, they're reducing their ability to take responsibility for their life, they're disempowering others. When they push the narrative of more empathy is better, they're doing exactly this. When they say that they should trust other people who know better, or trust me because, I have a degree in something, I know better than you, this is crashing people's ability to process. And therefore, the result doesn't match. There's a mismatch. We confront it with reality. We don't understand why it doesn't match because we believe that this is at 100%, because we believe that we have the data, and we believe that this is at 100%, especially with oversimplistic models. When people say it's true, it's easy to believe in it, even if we see it doesn't match with reality. And this means, to me, the whole system crashes down, and suddenly it's like being in a city with a map. We're told it's the right map, but we feel like we can't read it. We see it doesn't match. We see the names of the streets are maybe in the wrong language, maybe in the wrong alphabet. We can try navigating Bangkok with a map of New York. It's going to be complicated. Even if one street might be the same, or you go, hey, there's a Starbucks, so it might be the right map. We're using the wrong data, using the wrong processing. The result isn't matching, and it can be debilitating because it feels like, when I do this, I'm expecting a result based on all of my prior experience, but I'm not getting it. But I'm told the problem is me. So if I say something, if I apologize in a kind way to someone, I'd expect some level of reciprocity, but the person just abuses me. And so the whole system gets broken down. And I find that this is one of the parts that's, it's debilitating, disintegrates our ability to function, and is so confusing.
Yeah, 100%. And a lot of people that even when they get out of these types of abusive and toxic relationships, they are never able to resolve this process from, what was true, what was false, how did I process things, and the reality. That's why it takes literally months to heal and to overcome an emotionally abusive and toxic relationship, because you have so much data that you have to sort through, where what was my values, what was projected onto me, what was manipulative, what was real, what was truth. And most of the times there's no resolution. The person has to resolve it all themselves, because the toxic and abusive person is not available to resolve things.
Yeah.
So that's the that's part of the healing process, is basically unwinding this rope that the narcissist or the toxic person just wound around you, and you have to you're basically left to unwind it yourself. And that's the healing process, which takes a significant amount of time. And that's how a person gets their own thoughts back, their own values back, their own processes back, get back onto the right GPS map. You have to take away the virus, that data that's infecting the system.
Exactly.
And it's very difficult to navigate when when you're getting information that is throwing your coordinates off.
Yeah, I find for me one of the first points to start on is to question here. What do we know is true? And sometimes we don't know. For me, one of the first points, like light bulb moment points, was uncovering the first lie. And then it unraveled the first discrepancy between words and actions. And it was simply saying, yes, it would be great to see you, but seeing no actions coming afterwards, just to talk about and debrief on the relationship. And seeing that if somebody wanted to see me and all they had to do was send an email, but they're not doing it, that's telling me that they don't want to see me, so they lied to me. From then on, it's like the castle crumbled, the card house crumbled. And the other thing is to actually help people focus on this and go, You have a certain result from your process. Is it matching reality or not? And if it isn't, we know here that this is a fact, that there's a mismatch. So we can start there. We can start with what you see, what you know. You see there's a mismatch. You know this to be true. You see there's a mismatch. So let's build from what we know to be true. And then we tend to, because you're mentioning like the virus, we tend to remove the viruses from the mind. We look at the fake beliefs that they had or the erroneous beliefs. People are trustworthy. People are honest. This person is honest. This person tells me the truth. This person, you get that. Why would a person who loved me act this way? Well, what makes you think that the person loves you? Well, they said so. What makes you think that means it's true? Well, people wouldn't lie. Okay, now we've got the vulnerability through which the virus entered your mind. This is a belief you have. Does it match reality? No, it doesn't. So what are you going to do with it? And then we start building with, does it match reality or not? And then building from there, we can start taking the data and say the data, when you match it with reality, does it match or not? If it does, good. If it doesn't, then it doesn't. And then we slowly rebuild. But yeah, it's a difficult process to go through.
Yeah, it's very difficult. It's a very difficult process to go through. And even once out of it, it takes some time to unravel this mess.
How long did it take you to unravel it?
It took me about 3 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks.
Wow, that's quick.
Yeah. I worked with a therapist, but most of the work I did myself. And it wasn't so confusing to me, and there wasn't really so much it was very evident to me, because once I left the situation, the other person became quite the smear campaign started, and so it wasn't like that. I still had feelings. I just wanted to be totally free of the whole mess. So for me, I basically ran to a therapist and just started writing and venting all my unpleasant emotions down, unraveling all my thoughts, processing everything. So within 3 or 4 weeks, mind you, it was only a 9-month relationship, and I more or less wanted to leave from the start. So it wasn't really, I was dealing with more emotions along the lines of, frustration, and I guess, more to do with myself than the other person, because there wasn't really any good times. And that's something that was easier for me, because I didn't have to let go of any good times. I see people that have a honeymoon period with a toxic person. They have a time when there was idealization, where they felt wonderful with this person. Yep. They don't want to let go of that wonderful experience. They don't want to let go of the shared fantasy. I never had a shared fantasy with this person. I was basically just, got married, and after 4 days was kind of surprised and shocked and disturbed, and spent the next 8.5 months trying to get out in different ways. So I was able to get over it very quickly, but I understand for other people it can take a lot longer, because they have a lot more investment. I wasn't really so invested, and that could be actually another reason why it didn't really succeed. I think to myself, had I known now what I was involved in back then, I may have been able to positively influence the situation a little bit more. Not to say that it would have succeeded, but I definitely would have been able to handle it better. And I think with attachment trauma, their partner does play a huge role in whether it's going to succeed or fail. Not that it's up to the partner, but I'm saying that the partner of the person with attachment trauma does play a big role, because it's attachment trauma. So if because the person sees their problems as their attachment anyway. So now there's actually quite a bit of emphasis on what the spouse does, what the partner does. The partner just cuts and runs. A lot of the times, the person with attachment trauma will either just devalue them and disappear. That's like what a narcissist will do. They'll just basically forget that you exist, or smear you and then just disappear. Or if it's more of a borderline person, they'll tend to become more psychopathic. Like they'll start the revenge campaign. They will continue to irritate you, make up stories, create fabricated stories that degrade your character, okay, character defamation. And this is what happened to me when I left. A bunch of different scandals about the type of person that I was, and this is common with more of the like the BPD personality, where they will become hurt and vengeful, whereas a narcissist will tend to just smear you. If you're staying quiet, the narcissist is happy to just pretend like you don't exist and go elsewhere. Whereas the borderline, the more kind of psychopathic borderline, will become vengeful, and they'll actually want to destroy you.
Yep.
And this is what I went through, so it wasn't really that difficult to want to get out of this, but and there wasn't that honeymoon period, so I didn't have to really go over too much. For me, it was just more or less processing how I felt towards myself a lot more, and what I went through, and how did I get into that, and what was my responsibility, and what were my feelings, what were my blind spots. So I was able to work through that within about a month.
When you were working through that, did you have much else going on, such as work, or were you able to take a lot of time to just really process?
Yeah, exactly. I was able to just take a lot of time and process. Every night I would be there with pen and paper, just writing down things, from my childhood, writing down my feelings. I would write a lot of poison pen letters to the ex, just about, how I felt and all the things that I wanted to say that I didn't say in the relationship, and just got all of this toxicity and unpleasant feeling out onto paper, and then I would destroy it. I would burn it. And I was able to put a lot of effort and time into that. And that's also another factor why it only took like a month. Like, again, it was only a short relationship. It was only 9 months.
Yeah.
And most of the, the unpleasant emotions were towards myself more than the other person, because I could see that she had significant troubles and didn't make any sense to hold a grudge against someone that is essentially suffering on a very deep level. So I just had to resolve my own embarrassment, right? My own embarrassment, my own frustration, my own, disappointment, and what got me into this. How come this happened to me? What can I learn from this? What can I take away from this? What do I feel about this? And try and get these emotions out.
Yeah.
There was definitely no feelings or thoughts of, if only if this or only if that, or like trying to, go through this whole if only this or if only that, which another thing that people tend to go through is, if only I wasn't so angry, maybe it would have worked.
Yes.
Or like holding on to it. I was not holding on to it. I was just going through it's like cleaning out a basement, just trying to clear out all the rubbish as fast as possible. And it took me about 4 weeks.
Yeah. I think that there's quite a lot to unravel there. On the one hand, you mentioned the notion of hope, if only I hadn't done this, then maybe. And I think it's very dangerous to get into this because, it might change something, but if we look at percentages of probable outcomes, the likelihood of a positive outcome or healthy outcome is usually close to 0. And if we'd been a little bit less angry, we might go from, let's say, 2% to 3%. But that's not helpful enough. Like if it was a brain surgery, we said you got a 2% survival rate, you go, well, I'm not going to try it. But to go from 2 to 5%, well, the question is really, what is the alternative? If the alternative is certain death, then yeah, sure, it makes sense. If the alternative is something else working out, then you might go, well, if something else has got a higher chance of survival and success, then I'll go for it. But we often forget to weight this and measure it, and it's easy to take the blame, and also that assumes, using this diagram, that the reason why something didn't work out was something we did. Whereas we can also assume maybe the other person is hitting exactly the target that they wanted, and they enjoyed getting there, and they would always have found an excuse. I remember one of my friends on Twitter was writing how she remembered folding the napkins and always being shouted at if things were not folded perfectly. But you don't get shouted at because you didn't fold napkins. Somebody who wants to shout at you will find an excuse. And if it's not the napkins, it's going to be the toothpaste. And, we assume that there's a reason when sometimes it's like what Jung was saying. If you don't know why someone does something, look at the result. And maybe that was the goal. Maybe the goal is to shout at, I don't know if she was a woman or a little girl, Let's assume a little girl. Maybe the goal is to make a little girl really afraid. Why? Because some people are like that. Some people enjoy it, whatever the reason. Maybe that's what they want. And
exactly.
Yeah.
The other key difference that, and actually another key thing that I've seen, not only with my own experiences, but also with a lot of clients, is the timing and the situation. At the time when I first had this marriage that only lasted 9 months, that was a very toxic and disturbing relationship. Like it wasn't the right time for me to try and even be supportive. I wasn't even interested in really learning about anything with psychology. It wasn't the right time for me, and it wasn't the right situation. And that's something that, and also for her, obviously it wasn't the right time and it wasn't the right situation. So this is something also that people certainly need to accept, that it's not the right time for this person to heal, and it's not the right situation, and their time may never come. And that's something that was significantly different with my current wife, which has been a shining success, is that when we first got married, and more or less it was, like a repeat, I was in a situation now, and it was the time for me to say, okay, so obviously this is the second time I'm getting this. Maybe I need to learn something rather than just try and get out again. And also for my wife, my current wife, she was in a situation also where she was like, okay, so I have no choice but to work on this. And also the timing and the situation has to be right. And not everyone is at the place within themselves where they're going to make any changes. And with my current wife and I, we were at the right time and at the right situation. Like, for example, we were pregnant straight away. So now there's another factor in the situation. Whereas with my first wife, there was no baby. So it was a lot easier for me to just say, okay, I'm getting out of here. So the situation for the person with trauma does make a big difference. Are they at rock bottom? Are they at the point where they have to face their pain? Or like, are they motivated? Are they inspired to do it? Or are they just going to therapy to give you breadcrumbs to make you think that they're healing? But then they just go there and they complain about you for an hour every week, and the therapist just takes their money.
Yes, exactly.
So the situation and the timing has to be right. With my current wife and what we went through, we were at the time in a situation, and we were at the place within ourselves where we're like, okay, like we can either turn this into something that's going to benefit others, or we can just quit and, I'll probably never try this ever again, because it was the second time that I was trying it, my wife's second marriage also. But with the first wife, she wasn't at the right level of motivation. It wasn't the right time for her, and maybe she'll never heal. Maybe she will. Hopefully she does. But some people, that's another thing. People have to accept that maybe this person will never have their time. Maybe they'll never come to the right place where they're going to make change.
Yes, that's really important. I think it's to remember, some extent it's a choice. We can regret somebody's choice and we can respect it. And we don't have to assume we know better. We don't have to assume we understand better what's at stake. Somehow, there's something I learned in systemic psychology that I keep using all the time. Somehow, people's situations are working out for them perfectly. We don't need to understand how, but somehow it's working out. We can respect their choices, respect their ability to make the changes that they want if they want a different outcome. And if they're not making changes, then they're going to get the same outcome until it's time for them to change if they choose to do so. And at first, it's really unnerving when we want to go and help people, but it's actually, I find, much more respectful to accept that people have the ability to change if they want to. Not everyone wants to, and it removes a lot of pressure from our shoulders of trying to go and save the world, to just go, I'm not better than anyone else. I don't know better than anyone else. I might have a toolkit some people find helpful, but not everyone wants it. Or some people want to play games and try to get my attention and help see me solve problems that they don't want to have solved. So they're creating problems just because they enjoy seeing my effort. So it's always thinking, why would this person actually want to change something? What's not working out? Why do I believe they're motivated? How credible is this? And are the actions matching the words and the intentions that they state? And if they're not, then I see what's happening. Is the person acting like someone who wants to get better? If they are, then it's credible. And if they're not, then they're just somebody who's not acting like they want to get better and is saying that they do want to get better. But there's a mismatch, and we see it.
100%. Yeah. And I find that quite often people go into a relationship with the mindset of, I'm getting into this relationship to help. I'm going to be a helper. But the point of a relationship is not to help the other person. The point of a relationship is to connect to the other person. So, if the person goes into a relationship with the mindset of helping, it causes a lot of unnecessary, pain and suffering and, like just dragging out the situation. Whereas if a person goes into a relationship and wanting to connect themselves to the other person, and no, it's no longer about helping, it's about connecting, it's a lot easier to say to yourself, okay, so the person that I'm trying to connect to is not able to connect. For whatever reason, I don't know what it is yet, they're not able to connect. So therefore, my position in this relationship is redundant. I don't need to be here. In fact, I'm actually wasting my time.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's, I need to help the person, it's, okay, so you've been to 3 therapists and, let's try and get you to another one, and maybe we'll try this, we'll try that. And the person's trying to be a problem solver. But the whole idea of a relationship is to not to be a problem solver. You're not meant to be there to be a, to be a scientist. You're meant to be there to be a human being and connect emotionally. And if the other person is doing everything that they can and they've made it clear that, yes, I have trauma and yes, I have some toxic behaviors and I don't want them, and I'm committed to doing anything that it takes to heal so that we can have a deep connection, then you can stay in that. But if it's just about me trying to help you, that's not a relationship. That's a science experiment.
Yes, that's a good point. It's a science experiment, and it's also a volunteering, untrained therapy work. And if I have a problem with my brain, I'm not going to ask the person to improvise himself as being a brain surgeon. If I have a toothache, I'm not going to ask them to start operating on my teeth. I'm going to go and see a specialist for that. So it's one thing to have the toolkit to manage the relationship better. It's something else to be doing therapy to the person. And that's when I often see a unbalanced relationship between the two, where one person needs help, turns to the other for help, as opposed to being 2 adults communicating and working through things on an equal footing, and each assuming, what we bring to the table probably isn't 100% clean, but let's work through it. We've got blind spots, both of us. But if we respect each other, we work through it, then maybe we can improve things, as opposed to it being very asymmetric and skewed of one person is reliant on the other one. Because often when there's the asymmetry, one or both people want an asymmetric relationship for some reason, because it's fulfilling some kind of purpose.
Exactly. Yeah, ego function. And that's also a perpetuating dead end where it just goes round and round in circles. And there's definitely no problem with supporting a spouse that has toxic behaviors and they're trying to better themselves, but being the helper, to be the Superman or to be the rescuer or being the detective or the scientist, that can be a very long, drawn out, exhausting, painful process, because the other person might just continually breadcrumb and future fake and just keep you hoping for something that's never going to happen. And so I'm certainly not saying that you can't be supportive, but the intention of being in a relationship shouldn't be to help or to be this helper or rescuer, because that's certainly asking for a very long, drawn out problem.
I think so.
That's very important.
Yeah, it's. I think it's important to remember that we can wear different hats at different moments, but the primary hat should be partner, not therapist or punching bag or puppy, whatever it might be, or child. It's really, we are 2 adults in a relationship that's healthy, and so it's looking at the other person with respect, trusting their autonomy, their ability to sort out their own problems, whilst talking through some of them to some extent, but not replacing a therapist or not getting caught in these games. And I understand getting caught in the games can seem very familiar, can be something that people look for. It doesn't mean it's healthy. And let me see, I wanted to yes, you mentioned also, because sometimes we're caught in the games thinking maybe we're really close to finding the solution and we have this hope. And when people have been through a honeymoon phase, they usually have the hope of going back to it, and they think, if I stop things, I'm certain it's not going to happen again. Whereas if I continue, there's a possibility it might happen again. And I find this really, really unhealthy, because the possibility might be a 1% probability, but we don't think in terms of probability. We think, is it impossible or possible? Whereas if we walk away with certain that we're losing out on the hope, And the way I like to reframe this is go, well, if you continue, you have a high likelihood to stay in a toxic situation. But if you walk away, you have the possibility of finding a healthy one. In the current situation, you have virtually no probability or possibility of having a healthy situation, because it's not going to go back to the way it was like before. There's always this dark past, which is always going to be murky. So the question is, what do you want? Do you want to stay in a situation where you're renouncing future happiness and future healthy things, or are you willing to accept the possibility of having future happiness? So it's sort of reframing from the past to the future. Now, you gave up, you walked away, and you've helped people also just see reality a bit more clearly. How do you deal with this matter of hope and the honeymoon, and what strategies have worked for you and worked for your clients?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it's like super important. I think with this whole honeymoon phase and dealing with that, I like to stress to the individual that is dealing with this hope that this, honeymoon phase is coming back. This person that they dated, or this person that they got to have fun with and experience pleasant times with, hoping that they're going to come back. I just stress to the person that the lowest point in this person's behavior and the lowest point in your relationship, meaning the lowest point in the conflict, that's as good as your relationship is, and that's as good as it's going to get.
That's a good one. That reminds me.
What does it remind you of?
It reminds me when you do a photo exhibit, they say the quality of the exhibit or the portfolio is the quality of the worst photo in there.
Exactly.
It's not the 100%. Average. The worst
100%.
One, that's the quality. So the same, if you go for a 9-course dinner and only one of the dishes gives you a bad stomach ache, that's what counts.
Exactly. 100%. That's a very good way of putting it. And because the reality is that the worst human beings that walk on this earth can pretend to be nice for a year or two if they need to. Yes. Or shorter, especially for a few weeks.
Yeah.
So that doesn't prove anything. And that's the thing that I stress to the person. As bad as like the worst and lowest part of your relationship and the worst and the lowest part of this person's behaviors that you see, that's as good as it is. And that's it. What was happening before, it makes no difference now because this is what you have in front of you at this point. Yes. And therefore, obviously, hoping for this magical, grandiose, amazing person to come back, there's usually something underneath that as far as emotional trauma is concerned that is causing the person to want to hold on to that figure. They need that memory, they need that figure for something. And if that can be identified and well understood within the individual, and they can actually reframe that past trauma or that childhood emotion that they haven't been able to resolve and let go of, they will also let go of this honeymoon phase at the same time. And that's a very liberating thing when the person feels like that I don't need to hold on to this version of this toxic person anymore, because it's not actually about the toxic person. It's really about how they were feeling before that. They needed this person for something. And if they can resolve that emotion that they needed this person for, whether it was, they felt lonely in childhood, and therefore if they let go of this grandiose, idealized person, they're going to suffer in this loneliness again. So if they deal with that loneliness, they don't need this false character anymore. Or it might be rejection. They don't want to feel the rejection. They're holding on to something. They're not holding on to this person because they believe essentially that this person's coming back. They delude themselves into saying that because there's an emotion underneath that is causing them to want to hold on to this. And if they can identify what this emotion is and where it comes from and understand it deeply, and then go through the energy release processes, which is what you facilitate in your Cosmo Energy Healing or inner child healing in different modes, then if they're able to reframe and let go of this, they won't need to hold on to this vision of this person that they originally dated. They won't need to hold on to it, and then they'll be happy to accept and to move on without holding on. So that's something that is quite effective, is dealing what's underneath. What's the reason why you need to hold on?
This makes me think of that question that came up just when you were talking about it, is is asking people, why are you willing to give up on reality? You see what reality is. You see what the situation is. You're willing to give up on reality and just act upon reality and accept reality. Like, what's behind that? And it can be a lot of good reasons. You know, maybe it's the fear of the future. If I remove the person, what does my future look like? Well, you know, then we can start mapping it out. What might it look like? What are the options? You know, I might be alone. Okay, if you're alone, what do you do? And we start mapping out strategies and options and so on. But it's seeing the elephant is afraid of something. The elephant is reluctant. Let's talk about it. Because like I say, emotions are a dashboard. If we read the emotions, it gives us an indication of what our elephant is feeling. If we ignore it, the elephant doesn't stop feeling it. The elephant just doesn't feel heard and feels neglected. And it doesn't change the situation. It doesn't mean the elephant is right, because elephants don't understand probabilities. But it means we can actually address it and at least calm the elephant down. And maybe one of the goals is to just lead a life where the ride and the elephant get along on a happy place together and respect each other and help each other.
100%. Yep, that's definitely the productive way to deal with that, rather than trying to let go of this, let go of this person. It's not about the person; it's about the elephant. It's about the feelings underneath. It's about the reason underneath why the person has to hold on to this character that is never coming back. It never existed. Yeah. It was a ruse, right? A ruse. It
Exactly.
was a scam.
Yes.
And it's not that hard for people to admit I was scammed. But if there's emotions underneath that were pre-existing, like, I had one client actually that she discovered through the counseling process with me that the reason why she was holding on to this grandiose, amazing person that she fell in love with, and then he turned out to be a horrible, toxic person, the worst you can imagine, and it was guilt. And I'm like, that's interesting. What's behind this guilt? And she said, because I felt like by letting go of this person, that I'm going to be the one that's responsible for creating a broken home for my children. So now it's not an issue of the person changing and coming back. It's a case of resolving that guilt and letting go of that guilt. Because if she can resolve that guilt, she's going to have no problems in letting go of this, this failed father for her kids. Yeah. And there's a lot of different emotions underneath that can certainly cause a person to hold on to someone that not only is not coming back, but they never existed.
Yes, that's huge. I find a lot of guilt and shame tends to be underlying with these issues. Whether, I think for me, fortunately, one of the things that happened was I started feeling guilty for not addressing my issues. And so that made me address the issues, even though it was a fake pretext. So that's one of the best things that came out of it, is going, well, I see my level of responsibility, so I'm going to address everything, so I don't want this to be happening again. It turned out it was a ruse, but, I'm a better person for it. But when we find out what the guilt is, maybe I did something wrong, maybe there's some level of not knowing how to forgive ourselves. And, something comes up often is saying, well, maybe you did do something wrong, so what? Are you expected to be the first flawless human being ever to walk this earth? What will it take for you to forgive yourself when you did your best and you got it wrong? Because also when you got it wrong, if we look at it, in percentages, did you get it 0% right? Well, probably not. Maybe you just got it 40%. But maybe 40% is better than 10. And maybe, you used to get it at 20% right, and now you're 40%. So there's some improvement. But as long as we're reducing the imperfections, we're making progress. But when people guilt trip us because things are not 100% correct, that's also one of the toxic thought structures. And that's usually somebody who just enjoys bullying others, because often it's just bullying others and finding excuses to bully them. But when it's reframed, it's not really helpful.
No, it's not. And it's not. And especially if a person has like underlying emotions that they haven't been able to identify and label and let go of yet, and that gets them into a scam or a toxic relationship. It's not the person's fault. This relationship was just an awakening for them to try and finally get to these feelings and to resolve them. They didn't have that information at the time, and you can't really hold yourself too accountable for walking into something because you were unconsciously driven by these emotions that you weren't even so connected to.
Yeah.
So you're right. It does help significantly for the individual to to forgive themselves and to give themselves a free pass and try and learn about their feelings and their thoughts and their behaviors, rather than just basically putting themselves down and saying that they made a horrible mistake. So that's it's super helpful.
I think what's helpful here, also using the diagram before of decision making, is going, you were fed data that was inaccurate or was wrong or was just irrelevant. Your algorithm wasn't at 100%. So logically, based on these parameters, you came to conclusions that didn't make sense, and therefore you made, quote unquote, a mistake. But you did the most you could with the data you had and the algorithm you had. So it's a bit like, if you have an operating system that gets infected by a virus, what do? You remove the virus, and then you try to shut down the vulnerabilities, and you keep working. You don't disregard the entire operating system. We all have vulnerabilities. We can all get attacked by viruses somehow if they just find what the vulnerabilities are. For me, one of the common vulnerabilities I see is inability to process emotions, or fear of emotions, or guilt. And another one is oversimplistic thought structures. It's the tribalist thinking, you're with us or against us, the good people and bad people in the world. The ideological dogmatic thinking. I have the truth. Anything that doesn't match is bad, as opposed to, I have ideas that might make sense, but let's test them. And as soon as people think that way, they're super vulnerable. It's crazy. And it's crazy to see how many people are getting abused. And the blind spots they have is amazing. They're getting abused. They see other people get abused, but they side with the abuser while simultaneously denouncing flying monkeys all the time. And they're specialists or they believe they're specialists on narcissism. But you see that with some of I'm not going to mention them, but some of the high profile cases we see in the media, where all of the red flags are indicating something. And people who believe they're specialists don't see the red flags, and they can't comprehend that a second scenario is possible. You go like, of all the people whom I'd assume would see it, I'm assuming you would be. But you have these vulnerabilities, so you're completely blindsided to it. Oh, well, it's understandable. It's sometimes, given the people, surprising, but it shouldn't be surprising. It's like, well, we're all like this.
Yeah, it's very common today that things that are out in the open just don't get focused on. Don't get focused on. But I like that point that you mentioned actually about like discovery, right? Discovery is far more beneficial to the individual that goes through a toxic relationship, rather than, say, learning lessons, right? If you ask someone, oh, what did you learn from that relationship? They'll say, well, not to try this again. Or they'll say, oh, that, toxic people should burn in hell. It's like, well, okay, that's a nice lesson. But if you ask them, what did you discover about yourself? What emotions did you discover? What thought patterns? What did you discover about your elephant? How is what is your elephant holding on to? What emotions have you been carrying? Then it becomes profitable that you went through that experience. Whereas learning a lesson is a little bit too disciplinary, I think. I mean, what do you think about that? Meaning discoveries versus lessons.
I was just thinking about it. It's that I like a lot the discovery. What did you discover about yourself? I think with the lessons are a weighted word, because it can be a little bit school teacher saying, I hope you learned your lesson. I think what's, the unhelpful way is basically saying you did something wrong and now hopefully you feel bad about it and you won't repeat it. I think the more helpful way of viewing it is saying something along the lines of, I've identified our blind spots. I've learned what I should change and how to change it, and I've made improvements. And these are specifically, tangibly what the improvements are. And how should I put it? What I learned was from comparing the system with the data I got and the feedback. And so I've improved my system. And so if you explained, how did you upgrade your operating system, your algorithm, how would you explain it? And I think that explanation is what I perceive as being a lesson. But of course, you need to discover yourself in order to be able to upgrade that. So I think it's a combination of the two.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think with lesson, it's a weighted word that can be used in many different ways. One way can shut people down because it feels a bit, condescending or authoritarian. And the other one is more,
defeating.
Yeah. And the other one is simply, from your point of view, how would you express what you learned? I think that's a nicer way than talking about lessons, but roughly to me says the same thing.
Yeah, I get it. Oh, that's definitely a good question. Yeah, that's a good way to put it, because they can also learn a lot about themselves, which is the discovery side.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, and I know for me, and when I was overcoming that, and that month that I was really focusing on it, you know, one of the things that I learned was the discovery that I did go into the situation with a feeling of desperation. So that's, you know, the discoveries are very healing in themselves. It's like finding something in your body that shouldn't be there. You know, it's like, on one hand, it's a little bit painful to find it. It's like, oh no, I've got this, but it's like, yeah, but it's great that you found it. And
it was
until
there.
you find it, you can't. Yeah, it was there. So you know, that's discoveries are a very important part of the healing. You know, and I know
That's
for
true.
me, once I discovered that, which was one of the first questions I asked myself, how did I get into this? You know, like, I'm such a good communicator. I have so much confidence. I don't have attachment trauma. Like, my parents divorced when I was like 10 or 11 years old. So I was already through the formative years. I was already a teenager. I was about to get puberty, you know, so it's not as if I was a clinging child or I was codependent. I'm very autonomous, healthy sense of self, good self-esteem, you know, a competent communicator. I was thinking to myself, how did I get involved in this? Right? Meaning, I've never had this problem before. What's behind it? And when I discovered that I was approaching this relationship from an emotion of desperation, just because of my age and the options that I had to try and get married and have a family, I had a feeling of, I was feeling desperate. I had a feeling of desperation.
That's a good point.
And even just discovering that was like, oh, wow, that's an amazing relief, just to say to myself, okay, so I'm not an idiot. I'm not I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't make a mistake. I was feeling desperate. And this is why I was feeling desperate. And I was journaling it. I was writing it all down. This is why I was feeling desperate. This is what I was feeling. This is what was behind it. And now going through the process of reframing the perception around what it was that was making me feel desperate and letting go of that feeling of desperation. The next relationship I walked into, I wasn't desperate. I didn't feel desperate. So the discoveries are very healing in themselves.
Yes, that's a good point. That reminds me of the latest video I put up about my friend who married and had a child with a narcissist, was ready to leave.
Yeah, that was a good video. That was a good video. I love that video.
And so same thing, feeling of desperation. It's like I'm getting close to 40. I want a child, maybe two. What am I going to do? One person's here. Like, this is certainty. So it's a very fear-driven and desperation-driven choice, which actually makes sense. And I think, like to touch upon, and then we'll wrap up. It's been a long conversation, but you said you spent a lot of time writing and going through the process for about 4 weeks. And I had the luck to be able to go through it, also dedicate myself full time to just going through this, wanting to clear it out, which isn't easy if people have a job and people have other obligations. So I think it's important to remember it's not easy to dedicate time. It's a good idea to do it. It requires courage. The alternative is risking to drag it along. And when we go through this, we can either put in avoidance mechanisms and strategies and ideologies. We can address what's inside us. And the avoidance ones that I see usually are, shopping and drinking and alcohol and gambling and social media and videos and so on. Anything that avoids us looking inside and trying to address things inside isn't helping. And even to some extent, YouTube videos, some of them might help us understand things and others might simply be fueling the anger that we have. But the anger is usually outwards driven, unless it's dealing with ourselves. But I see a lot of it being outwards driven, or the ideology of going, what happened here is because the person is a woman or is a man, or this is the way people are, or you were wrong, you should be angry. There's some, of course, understandable emotion there. But if things are avoiding us, dealing with what's inside of us, then the healing is going to take longer, if it happens at all. And it can be relatively fast. But that also means finding the courage to do it. And it's not easy to find the courage. To me, the driver was thinking, I don't want to risk losing someone again, first of all, and then going, wait a minute. The person lied to me. Now I'm going to sit down and go through this. Wait a minute. Writing was very helpful to just process the thoughts, get the emotions out. And working with a therapist was also helpful. But at one point when I hit the key, it was like, okay, now I understand the person lied to me. I just need to unravel this. And it's like, I've got all the tools to go through it and unravel it. I just need to sit down with myself, stop running away, and just get this over and done with. A bit like you have a wound, pour on the disinfectant. It's going to burn, but the alternative is an amputation. So it's like, I'm just doing this.
Exactly, 100%. And I definitely subscribe to the same philosophy of, if you go through something unpleasant in your life, especially a toxic relationship, we can choose whether we're going to see it as something that can strengthen us and benefit us in the long run, or we can choose also to keep holding on to it like a weight that's just like a burden that weakens us and stops us from moving forward. And really, step one of healing is making the choice that I want to benefit from this. It was so uncomfortable and it was so confusing and it was so unpleasant, but I want to convert this unpleasant experience into a benefit, right? Because who doesn't want to benefit, right? That's what we're here for this. We're here to benefit from our experience in this world. And that is step one. And, I know I definitely had that. As soon as I got out, I was like, okay, this was horrible. I want to basically take this 9 months and turn it into something that is strengthening and beneficial and enlightening to me. I don't want to have this 9 months as a dead weight that I'm carrying around for the 10 years and have to avoid the emotions through drinking and, distracting and, other like social media addictions and other ways that people cope. So it's a choice of wanting to benefit and to become strengthened from it is step one, is just saying, okay, yes, this was unpleasant. It's not about being toxically positive and saying, oh, this happened for spiritual reasons and this is all from the universe. So no, it's about how can I strengthen myself and what can I discover about myself from this, because the whole situation was horrible. You're never going to be able to turn a toxic relationship into something that was positive. Nonsense. Fairy talk, right? So, but you can benefit from it. You can grow from it. You can definitely become better. You can discover things. There's a lot of things that you can do after experiencing a toxic relationship. And really, step one is about making that choice that I can either keep this as a horrible experience plus a dead weight, or I can use this horrible experience as something that really benefits and strengthens me in the long run. That's step one.
Yes, that's a good point. I think it's also important realizing, the past is what it is. What future do we want? Do we want 10 years of flagellation, or do we want to get this over and done with quickly so we can go and do more fun things?
Exactly. And I left the relationship. I didn't have the money to go to therapy. I mean, the therapist that I had was $120 a session. I was broke, and I was so keen to really try and convert this horrible situation into something that was strengthening and empowering and do some self-discovery that I borrowed the money to go to therapy. I just got the money for wherever I can. I had to walk a long way to get to therapy, but I didn't want to keep that 9-month disaster as a black hole in my life where it was like, oh yeah, the black hole, don't bring it up. I can't talk about it, but give me a bottle of drink vodka and avoid it. I wanted to transform it into something that was strengthening. And I see that people that come to coaching or to counseling or to therapy that don't make any progress, they haven't made that decision yet. That they want to take their past experiences that were unpleasant and possibly traumatic and to really transform into something that was strengthening and empowering. Until they make that decision, very hard to make progress.
The elephant doesn't want to move. So
exactly. You have to give it some peanuts.
Exactly. You got to motivate the elephant. If the elephant doesn't want to, the elephant doesn't want to, which is fine. But you're not going to be successful if the elephant doesn't agree.
Exactly. You have to get the elephant. You have to get the elephant to move, which means that you have to give it some type of benefit, right? People don't move without benefit.
Exactly. And maybe a bit of attention, a bit of a benefit, addressing what's concerning the elephant. And once the elephant feels a bit more listened to, cared for, and maybe feels that the rider wants the elephant to be happy in the future, and that it's okay to be happy, and they make peace with each other, then it's easier for them to work as a team. Otherwise, the elephant's just going to sit there and go, I don't trust what's happening. I don't know. Maybe the only time I get attention from the rider is when I'm feeling miserable, and the rider feels sorry for me. Maybe that's the only thing that works. But then maybe we have to change some things to move forward. Yeah.
100%. And that change that you're talking about goes back to the very first point that you made in this nice conversation, was that in order for the change to happen, the writer has to own the elephant, has to say, this is my elephant. And that's also part of the healing process initially, is just saying, it doesn't matter about this toxic person anymore. It doesn't matter about anything. It's, I'm owning what I went through, and I'm owning what I'm feeling, and whatever you own, you can do something about. And that's another thing where people get stuck and they don't find healing and progress, is when they're not ready to own it yet. They're not ready to own their elephant. They're still expecting someone to come along and to do something with their elephant, or they want someone else to do it, when as soon as you own it, you can do something with it.
That's exactly it. Looking for advice as opposed to just sitting down, listening, trying, getting it wrong, but then improving. And especially showing that we care and that we're going to work it out. And the elephants are forgiving. It's like, I can see you're trying. It's okay. We'll work it out.
Exactly.
Great. On that note, I think it's time to wrap up. It's been a long conversation. I really enjoyed it. Good talking to you with Josh.
Yeah, same to you, Fred. I'm always very enlightened by your wisdom and your input and your diagrams. So I want to encourage you to keep sharing your fantastic content.
Thank you. I'll do so. And please continue sharing yours also. And I look forward to talking again soon.
I'm also looking forward. Take care.
Take care. Bye. Oh, and for everyone watching, thank you so much for watching. It's been a long conversation. I'll see if we post it as one long video or a few shorter videos. These conversations, like we mentioned, it's not easy to cut them up into short segments all the time. And there's a lot of value, I think, to having a proper conversation that lasts for more than a few minutes. So thank you for watching along. Hopefully you found some elements that you think are interesting, probably some elements that I touch upon in other videos, but it's nice to be able to take more time and to talk with someone. I prefer talking with people than talking at the camera. The whole YouTube experiment is a bit strange because it's a bit counterintuitive. So I'm working through this. Thank you for taking the time of being part of this, of watching, and for your feedback. The likes are very nice, but the feedback is especially heartwarming when we see how things work. Some of the feedback is also a constructive criticism, so thank you for being so kind with your words. I really appreciate it. The goal is to make more helpful content, as long as I've got new things to share that I haven't done before that are helpful, continue doing it. I highly recommend Josh and his channel. What is the name of your channel, by the way? Gold CBT, I believe.
I believe it's, 1 second. I'm not even sure what it is. Let me check.
Okay.
I think it's just Josh Goldberg.
Okay, perfect. I'll put the link in the description of the video. I highly recommend his content. As you see, we've got, slightly different approaches, but at the same time, they're complementary. And his videos are really nice. Highly recommend them. The videos of his wife also, very interesting. So yeah, thank you for watching and see you soon.